You are watching Reed's Conversations, a podcast series on writing, filmmaking, acting, and theater. For today's episode, I'll have a conversation with novelist and screenwriter Christopher Valin. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reed's Conversation, the podcast series where we talk about writing, filmmaking, and theater. Today, I have a very special guest that I'm very excited to have. This is going to be novelist and screenwriter Christopher Valin. Christopher, thanks so much again for being on my show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so I know that currently we're in different time zones. Currently, where I live in Kentucky, I think it's like 5:30. So currently in California, it's 3:30 your time.
Right, 3:30. That's
Awesome.
correct.
Awesome. Yeah. So I was just thinking the way how it's best to start off the interview is talk a little bit more about just you. We know, so you're a novelist, screenwriter, but also you're a high school teacher. And I think
hmm
so it's been how many years you've been doing that for?
26.
26.
Yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
26 years.
That's awesome. And yeah, and let's so I was thinking, would you like to just talk a little bit more about you, like where you're originally from? How did you have you always lived in California, or were you born in different part of the country? And kind of like what sparked your love for cinema and for just writing and novels. So I was wondering if you'd be able to share a little bit more about that, just about yourself.
Sure. I was born in Massachusetts in a town just close to Boston, and my dad worked for the government, and we moved around a lot. So we moved to Colorado when I was in first grade, and then back to Massachusetts again in middle school, and then we moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico when I was in high school. And then we went back to Colorado, and I was in Colorado until 1999. I was married to my previous wife at the time, and her dad got sick. He had Parkinson's, so she wanted to come back to California, where she was from. And I had been trying to do the screenwriting thing for a while, so that's how I ended up in California. Um, but as far as writing goes, I've always been obsessed with movies, TV shows, and comic books and novels, but especially comic books. So when I was a kid, I would draw all the time, and I would make up stories, and I would have to come up with the story in order to draw the pictures because I did full comic books. I just folded a bunch of paper together and stapled the edges and then drew all the panels and all the characters and stuff. So I didn't realize what I was doing at the time was writing to get my stories together. Um, and then when I got older, um, I heard that Star Trek was accepting scripts. The Star Trek shows were accepting scripts from outsiders. And as long as you um, whatever signed whatever contract saying, if they have a similar idea, you are not going to sue them or whatever. um, so I wrote a Deep Space Nine script, and I sent it off. And right after I sent it off, while it was still probably in the mail, they announced that they stopped taking them.
Oh man. So
Yeah,
just as you sent off the script for an episode of Star Trek's Deep Space Nine, they're like, nope, sorry, no more submissions.
right. Before it probably even got there, it was that close. Um, and I had worked in the comic book industry for a little while at that point, on the side. I never worked for Marvel or DC or, one of the big companies, but I did work for some small publishers, and I was an inker, and also I started writing at the end. And I guess that's when I realized that if I could write a comic book script, I could probably write a TV script. And that's when I did the Deep Space Nine one. And then I had an idea for a film, um, and started working on that while I was still writing the Deep Space Nine script. Um, I wrote it. It was a feature called Secret Disciple, and um, I sent it off to the first contest I heard about, and they made the quarterfinals. Um, and then it also made the quarter, I think the semifinals or something in Scriptapalooza. And then it was a quarterfinalist in the Nickel, um, and a semifinalist in the one of the other ones that was big at the time that's not around anymore. But anyway, the same script just kept doing well on all these different. And I came out to California before we moved here. We were out here visiting, and it was during the Writers Guild Foundation conference in 1999. It was like in spring of '99. And while we were there, I I met some people, and we were going out to dinner or something. I don't remember. We were getting in a van, like a shuttle, at the hotel. Where it was at Lowe's down on Santa Monica Beach. Um, and as we're sitting in the van, one of the other people, because we were all writers, she looked over and she said, "Oh my God, I think that's Ted Rossio and I mean Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio." And I looked over and they were sitting together, just like on a bench or something outside the lobby of the hotel. And I was like, "Oh my God, that they were on that website that I read all the time." And I had been participating in the I'd been reading the columns and participating in the forums. Um, so I thought, well, I hope I can find them, you know, at some point in this conference I can find them. And I never did. I never saw them again. Oh,
Oh,
I did get to talk to Shane Black.
really? Okay, that's
Yeah.
cool. Shane Black.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had a mixer down on Santa Monica Pier, and everyone was just standing around with drinks, and I saw him and I walked up and just said, "Hey, I just want to tell you, I'm a big fan." And he sat there and started asking me all kinds of questions. He was really, really nice, and I was a little bit starstruck as a
Yeah.
writer.
That's so cool because you sometimes you just don't know a particular individual, kind of like what their boundaries are. So it's like,
Hmm.
sometimes they won't be as talkative or it's
Hmm.
like, well, thank you so much. But that's so cool. So Shane Black, for those, could you, for viewers who don't know who that is, if they don't, we're gonna correct them. So can you talk about who Shane Black is, but also who Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott are for viewers who are not familiar with their names? So would you be able to
Okay.
describe just their work and just kind of
Yeah.
like why it's such a big deal when you met these guys? Or
So Shane Black is a big screenwriter. He's also director now. His first sale was Lethal Weapon, and he sold it for a lot of money back in the 80s. And it kind of sparked off the kind of buying frenzy of spec scripts for a while in the late 80s and early 90s. And he has a particular style of writing screenplays that make them just as enjoyable to read as, as to watch the finished product. Um, like anyone who reads a Shane Black film screenplay is gonna probably really enjoy it. These little asides and stuff. For a long time, a lot of screenwriters were trying to copy him, and they were like, "No, no, no, don't do that." He's good at that, but not everybody can do it.
yeah.
um, um, so he's done a lot. He's written a lot of movies over the years, and he wrote and directed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with uh, Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, that's a good movie. And then Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott are screenwriters, um, co-writers, and they have been in the business for, well, I guess about 30 years. And they wrote, um, let me see, I think their first movie might have been Little Monsters.
Yep. Little Monsters. Yep. That's
Yeah,
their that was
yeah,
their respect screen set.
right.
Yeah.
And then they wrote Aladdin, the Disney animated film. Um, they wrote the Zorro movies, the reboot of Zorro, starring Antonio Banderas. Those movies were huge. Obviously, Aladdin was huge. And then they did the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and Shrek. So um, they were, I think, the most sought after screenwriters in the world around the turn of the century, around the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. And so when you happen to be in that car with other fellow writers and you happen
Hmm.
to pass Terry and Ted, oh, so this was what year was that? Was that 1999? So this
Yeah.
was before Shrek ever got
Yeah,
released.
yeah, yeah.
But you
Yeah.
definitely remember them from their past movies like Aladdin, Mask of Zorro, and I think a lot of people don't know they also worked on Men in Black, which is
Oh
another
yeah. Yeah.
huge six. But
Hmm.
so how did you so with the word player site? So you came across that in 1999, was it? And
Hmm.
at
No, 98, I think.
90, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just talk about that experience, just meeting other writers, because I know there's a lot of great talent that emerged. It's kind of like as far as uh, because I think a lot of people or outside of Hollywood have the misconception thinking that as far as writing goes, they think, oh, if only this script was brought to this so and so person, it'll get made. But it's really the quality of work determines who you get to know in some cases, or most cases, honestly. So just talk about how when you came across wordplay, was there because you said that you wrote a screenplay called Secret Disciple, and that was really big for a lot of your contests. So was that written before you came across wordplay, or was it after you came across the wordplayer .com site?
It was around the same time that I was writing it. So I was definitely reading wordplay columns when Secret Disciple was being written. And I think I started it in 98 and finished it in 99. Uh, at the time, sometimes I tend to get obsessed with certain things, and I was obsessed with screenwriting. I still have like three three bookshelves full of just screenwriting books that I read back then. Um, just anything I could find. And I also was like devouring any websites or um, anything online I could find, which at that time, it wasn't that much really. Certainly not compared to now. Um, and Wordplay was the best one I came across. It had a great columns, and a really active, forum where Terry would answer questions, and you could interact with him, and you could ask other writers questions. And so it was kind of a weird confluence of things that happened, is that I kind of knew who people were from the wordplay message boards. And then I met some people at the Writers Guild Foundation conference. And some of them were the same people. And it was just a coincidence that I happened to meet people, because I wasn't like searching them out or anything. Um, and then when I moved here, I didn't know anybody. So I just started hanging around with people that I had met, and joined some writers groups. And there was a dinner at Jerry's Deli, um, up with a bunch of word players that lived in California, in Los Angeles. And so they announced it, and I went to that. And then that was where I really met some people that I still, you know, am good friends with, like Steve Barr and Mikey Zell, and Melanie Kowski, who was the person that organized it. She had gone to high school with Terry, and she was a real big word player that organized a lot of get-togethers and stuff, gatherings. And uh, Steve's writing partner at the time, Danny Grossman, who was a great guy, but unfortunately he passed away about 7 years ago.
Oh, sorry to know that.
Yeah, yeah, it was devastating, unexpected and devastating. Um, so there was just a ton of people, and Mariama was one of them. Um, and I started going to the movies once a week with Melanie, Mariama, and another word player named Brian Polito. And we talked about writing, and we would uh, watch a movie and then go to dinner and discuss it and stuff like that.
And I think that
And
I'm so sorry, keep going.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment, like, that's really cool because I think that's kind of important if you are in any kind of creative endeavor, just having like-minded people that you can really kind of, not so much, it's not like you're trying to use the other person of, oh, can you make this film? It's really, hey, we're just traveling journeyman writers who have the same kind of goals, but also what comes out of it is really good friendships that have lasted for what, how many years? 20, 25.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that's awesome. So just having that group of just friends where, and that way, if you do have material and it's like, hey, would you mind taking a look at this? And just getting, I would assume, positive, constructive feedback. There's no agenda. It's not like, it's kind of like a good, healthy kind of environment. So that's fantastic that you got to do all that. Seriously, that's really cool.
Yeah, I would say anyone that's trying to be a screenwriter or any kind of writer, definitely join a writing group. Not only will you probably become friends with the people, but it's some other people to talk about the stuff with, show your work to, get feedback. It really, really is helpful. I mean, you can give it to your mom or your brother to read or whatever. They're probably just going to go, "Oh yeah, that's really good." It doesn't really help. Um, and another thing I would say is some people get really competitive. Um, I say don't get competitive and be standoffish with other writers. The best thing to do is become good friends with them, and everybody will move up together usually. It's not like if one person is successful, then you're not going to be, or something like that.
Yeah, it's just really cutting off the whole cutthroat mentality, which I honestly hate that whole mentality because it's just at the end of the day, it's just like there's no winners. There's no winners at all. But also, I think Shane Black, going back to him real quick, I think
Mhm.
he did something similar when he was starting out because I know he worked with Fred, he was an actor, and I think he worked with Fred Decker, who also did a guest column for Terry on the wordplayer.com site, where, he started as an actor, he wrote Monster Squad, and then he eventually kind of got to the lethal weapon status, I believe. But yeah, so I think it's important just to have a group of friends, and because that's, another form of networking. But I think some people today just have that very competitive streak where they have to be the top dog, which like no, like it's kind of like just help each other along the way. So I think that's great that you had that. And also with Danny Grossman, I unfortunately never met him, but I did read a short film script that he and Steve Barr co-wrote called Flirting with Death. Wonderful, wonderful script. So I definitely know who you're talking about, but unfortunately, but yeah, so he definitely sounded like a really amazing guy. So I do my condolences. I had no idea he passed away 7 years ago.
Yeah, after that first uh, gathering at Jerry's Deli, I started to become good friends with Mikey Zell. I started writing scripts with him. Um, and then Danny and Steve are writing scripts together. We started kind of our own little writing group. I was in a bigger one, but the four of us kind of just started getting together and reading each other's stuff, and we were brutally honest with each other. And and then even when still weren't really doing that much anymore, we were going out to dinner every few months together. But then Steve moved to New Zealand, and of course, Danny passed away. So, but for a long time, we were kind of closely knit when we were writing. We also made some short films together. A couple. Mike came to me. He found out I had a high eight camera, and he came to me and said, "Hey, we should make a movie. I have an idea for a short film." And I said, "Sure." And we went and bought some lights at Home Depot, and took my high eight camera and bought a new microphone for it. And Mike had this location that he could go to, and it was called One Flew Over Spago. It was like a, play on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but for screenwriting. And Steve starred in it. Steve Barr was the main character. And it came out for us just throwing it together. It came out good. I mean, it wasn't going to win any awards or anything, but it was just for our first attempt and everything. And then a bunch of other people worked on it with us too. But a lot of them were word players also.
Yeah, and was this the start of the so-called film group? Because I've heard about that. Because I remember seeing that mentioned by Steve
Mhm.
Barr before and other word players. So is that the group you're talking about, the so-called film group? That's short for Southern California Film Group. Was that it?
Uh, it's kind of where it came from. So Mike and I those made that one, and we made a second one called Johnny Hattori Ninja Agent, and that one starred Danny Grossman, and a bunch of the same people worked with us on that. And basically, Steve and Danny and some other people were like, "Hey, let's just start doing this all the time. We'll just start a group, and we'll just make movies all the time." And but Mike and I both had small. I had my wife, my current wife, and I had just had a baby, and Mike had two young sons, and we were like, well, we love doing it, but there's no way we can just be going out every weekend, and making movies. So they went on. We participated. I definitely participated in some of the films they did in different ways. I used to draw storyboards for them, and one time they filmed it in the outside of my apartments. um, but yeah, they kind of went off without us, even though Mike was like the one who came up with the original idea.
That's so cool. Yeah, and I'm sure that just because I think what's that old James Cameron quote, not Crow, James Cameron quote of all you need to do is just take a film and make it. Doesn't matter how crappy it is as long as you make it. So that's what you're trying to do, get that hands-on experience from just making short films and understanding how the process of films work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was like one of the things that Terry would say is just go out there and do something, for yourself. And actually Terry had a premiere party for our second film at his house.
Really?
And yeah, that was really fun. S well, so one of the things that happened was some of us who had been going to the get-togethers at Jerry's Deli and other restaurants, and we went and saw Gladiator as a group when it came out. Uh, Melanie started inviting us to like parties at Terry's house. So he would usually have a theme. It was a costume party or whatever. Not always, but sometimes there was a theme. So that was like amazing for me to like just having moved to California and wanting to be a screenwriter, and then I get to go to his house up in the Hollywood Hills. um, but it was mostly just same people I was hanging around with and working with, and everything. It wasn't like there was a bunch of Hollywood stars there or anything.
Yeah, it's just
Uh,
you're just a group of friends where it's like, hey,
mhm.
let's just have fun. Let's just have fun. We're just gonna do this and that. That's awesome. Man.
And there was one. This is gonna this might top everybody's story for what wordplay did for them. But so there was a party coming up. It was going to be a toga party, and I wanted to invite a friend of mine that I worked with at the time. He was a school counselor, and so I called Terry up and I said, "Is it okay if I bring a friend?" And he said, "Male or female?" And I said, "Male." And he said, "Well, it's fine, but it's really unbalanced right now. There's like going to be a bunch of guys coming and hardly any women. So if you're going to bring a guy, you have to bring a woman, yeah, at least one woman too." And I was like, "Okay, I'll see what I can do." And I couldn't find anyone. A friend of mine had come from out of town and stayed with me for a few days, and there was someone that he knew from his work who had a friend who lived in LA, and he had gone and seen her, and like her phone number was sitting on my desk. And and so I thought, what the heck? And I called the number, and I'm never like this, so I don't know. I guess it was fate or something. I called the number and I said, "Hey, this is Dan's friend Chris, and I know it's going to be weird, but would you like to come to this party in Hollywood?" And she's like, "Well, I guess I don't really know you, but." And so she came with a friend and she showed up, and I had never seen her or anything. And we ended up after that we ended up dating and then getting married, and now we have two kids. We've been married for
Oh, great. So that
24 years.
that's your wife. Wow.
So it's basically because of wordplay that I met my wife and have my kids.
Oh, that's so awesome. Oh my gosh.
And
Wow.
and Terry knows that, so
That's cool. So what if
we
you
talked
did,
to him about it.
so if you weren't encouraged to make that call, yeah, that wow. That is awesome. Wow, thanks for sharing with that. That's
Sure.
cool. Wow. And then and also also, I want to talk more about your work too, because
Hmm.
aside from doing Secret Disciple and being an anchor, was it is the official title an anchor for comic book? You also went into, I think there was one particular book that caught my eye. It's nonfiction, and it's something to do that you're related to. I think if I check my notes real quickly, it was Sir the Rear Admiral Sir Charles Douglas or something like that. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you discovered this person was your ancestor and you writing the book about it because you wrote a book and would you be able to talk more a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. So my bachelor's degree was in history, and then I got my teaching degree. And most teachers, after a while, they end up getting a master's if they don't already have one. Um, and so I didn't want to get a master's in education. I wanted to get it in a subject. So I went back to school for military history, because I've always been interested in that. And um, my whole life, when I was a kid, my dad would always say, "We're related to Sir Howard Douglas." And I had no idea who it was. And he said, "He's in the Encyclopedia Britannica." So I looked him up and I saw him in there, and he was like the governor of New Brunswick, Canada for a while and started the university there. And he did all this other stuff. Um, People in England know him, and some people in Canada know him, but in the United States, most people have never heard of him. But then when my grandfather passed away, he gave my dad some genealogy stuff, and I started really getting into like finding my family tree and putting it in ancestry.com and getting as far back as I could. And he said, "Oh, I have a bunch of stuff." And he gave it to me, and it was just like a gold mine. It had all these typed on a typewriter letters between my grandfather and his cousin in Canada that basically proved that they were the great grandsons of Sir Howard Douglas, and all this other family tree stuff and all the names and all the dates and a couple of pictures. It was just unbelievable. Um, so when I started looking into Sir Howard Douglas, I found out his father was actually even more famous. Sir Charles Douglas was a British captain during the Revolutionary War, and he led a fascinating life. So after reading a little bit, I kept reading about him, and it seems like most, at least naval historians or military historians, knew who he was. But every time I wanted to find something about him, I had to look in a different book. So, a little bit would be here, a little bit would be there. And then luckily the internet was at the point where people were scanning in a lot of articles and stuff like that. So I was able to find old newspaper articles and everything else. Um, but there was never a book about him. A book had never been written about him. So um, I wrote my master's thesis on Sir Charles Douglas, and I was almost done with it. And I had read uh, a fiction book where he was a character. He was a character in a fictional book. So I wrote an email to the publisher and asked, about the author and everything. And that publisher said, "Oh, you're writing a book about him?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "If you want to get it published, you should send me the manuscript when it's done." And I was like, "Okay." And I sent it to him. after it was finished, and he said, "Well, you make it a little bit longer, and I'll publish it as a book." So I uh, I
Wow.
filled it out more, and yeah, it was my first book that got published, and that was really cool. And then
Wow.
um, Sir Howard Douglas had written a book back in the 1800s, early 1800s, about his how his father should get credit for this famous naval maneuver called breaking the line. Um, and there was no new edition of it. There hadn't been an edition since the 1800s. So I talked to the publisher, and we decided we're going to make a new version. So I also um, took his original book and put a bunch of notes and appendices and all kinds of stuff and wrote a bunch in there. And that got published too.
Wow. And also, can you tell our viewers what the name of the book is, the official title? Because I think can they find it on Amazon, eBay, or anywhere that sells that
Yeah,
particular?
it's any place that sells books probably has it. It's called Sir Charles Douglas and the Breaking of the Line. That's the famous naval maneuver called breaking the line.
Man, and this is so cool because this is your ancestor. This is like an actual blood relative from,
Mhm.
my gosh, what, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, he's my great 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 grandfather.
Man, that's so awesome. And also after with this experience, was this also after with the success of finding the publisher and getting your this book nonfiction published, did that kind of get your kind of give you the idea of wanting to do just kind of get into novel writing and fiction, or can you talk a little bit more about how that got started? Because I think you were telling me about the young adult series. I think it's called the Red Raptors. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's called Raptors, and the main character is called Red Raptor. He's a superhero, teenage superhero, kind of like a sidekick at the beginning, and then there's a trilogy, and he basically grows up during those three books, and then there's three books after that called Harrier, where he becomes takes over for his mentor and becomes Black Harrier. And then there's going to be three more coming out probably in a year or two that we're working on now.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Because that's so cool. So yeah, so do you think that if you hadn't tried to get well, thankfully you had great encouragement from that publisher just by contacting him, but do you think was it just that as the springboard, or was it just already kind of there at the preset of like, you know what, I want to try to do a series of novels that has no relation to history, just something that's pure fun that any age can read for the most part?
Uh, so I was kind of I kind of got the wrong impression because that was so easy to get my first two books published that I was like, oh, okay, well, this is not that hard. So I just thought I could write books and just they would get published that easily, which I soon discovered was not the case. I just got lucky at the beginning. But I've been writing short stories, mostly science fiction short stories that had been published in a couple of anthologies. And then those two books got published, which gave me the false impression that it was pretty easy to get, a book published. And then on top of that, I started a screenplay about Red Raptor. So I started working on it as a screenplay, and it was during the mid 20 teens when young adult books were really, really popular. Um, so I thought, well, maybe I should write it as a novel instead. And then if it's popular, then maybe someone will want to buy it to make a movie out of it or a TV show. So I created that uh, character and wrote the book, and I sent it out to a bunch of publishers and agents and literary managers, and most of them said, "Oh, this is good, but it's not what we're looking for," or something like that. So I ended up publishing it myself at first, but it was just a novella at that point. It was fairly short. Probably best for like middle school, age. Um, and then this guy I had done some superhero stories for in some anthologies, Steve Bowyer, he said, "Hey, can I work on some stories with you?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, yeah." And he wanted to write my characters, which I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Another author, wanted to work on my characters. Um, and uh, Steve started a publishing company called Athon Books with a friend of his named Brett Bruno, and they ended up becoming one of the biggest sci-fi and fantasy publishers on Amazon and Audible. In fact, just this past week, they had the number one book on all Audible. So, and
Wow.
sometimes they've actually a couple of their books have been the number one book on Amazon out of all the millions of books on Amazon. A couple of times books they published were on there on number one. So, um, he said, I want to publish, Red Raptor books, but we're going to have to make them longer. And part of the problem with me writing novels is I still think like like a screenwriter. I have a hard time filling it out. My my prose is very direct. It's almost like reading a screenplay, just with a little more detail. So, um, so he said, well, if I can work on it with you, then I'll help you expand on it. So that's what he did. We became co-authors, and he, I'm good at coming up with a story and writing what I call a skeleton draft. And then he's really good at filling stuff out. It's already there. So we'll do that. And then I'll go back through and do a pass, and he'll go back through and do a pass. And yeah, it seems to work out really well. So we put they, it's on Amazon, but it's also on Audible as one of their free series if you have a subscription. So if you have a subscription to Audible where you get a credit every month, there's a bunch of books you can read for free anytime. And they Audible bought those books from us, bought the rights to make, and they made the audiobooks themselves with, so they're very professionally done. Um,
Wow,
and they have thousands and thousands of listeners and like 5,000 reviews or ratings, so it's really good.
that's so cool. Wow. And I take it with it. Oh, so when Amazon did the royalties and all, well, not royal, I was about scratch that, reverse it, as Willy Wonka would say. Uh, so once Amazon contacted you for the rights, do you get like a royalty for whatever they publish through Audible, especially if they're having it professionally read by, readers or actors or anything like that? Just to kind of give an idea for those who don't know how the business side of that works, for those who are curious.
Most of the time when you do an audiobook, your publisher puts it on Audible and then you get paid royalties as they sell. But because this was part of their new service of free books, we don't get royalties from it. They just paid us up front and then to put it on their free. And then it just gets lots and lots of listens. And then it helps sell our other books or the hard copies of the print copies of those books on Amazon, which we do get royalties from. So the audiobook version, they already bought and they own it. It's kind of like if you sold your script to a studio and now they can do whatever they want with it. But
Gotcha.
but the print book is for sale on it. Those are up for sale on Amazon. You can buy them there and we'll get royalties.
That's so cool. I'm going to be sure to buy a copy of your book because I sadly have not read it, but just with you talking about it, it makes me want to go out and read it some more. So I appreciate you just describing that, the whole journey of how
Hmm.
it got published in Audible.
Thanks.
Um, and then also, there's also a couple of other noteworthy projects I want to talk about too that you've worked on. So on the topic of screenwriting contests, I also learned that you did article, I think it was for a screenplay contest for Kirk versus Picard, I think it is. And want to talk a little
Yeah,
bit about that?
yeah. Back in 2007, uh, CBS Interactive had a screenwriting contest on their website called Kirk versus Picard. And it was officially sponsored by CBS and Star Trek, and they had George Takei and Will Wheaton involved. And they had everybody vote on a premise first. And once the premise was set, you would write the first act and post it, and people would read it and give it ratings. And the ones that got the most ratings would win for that week, like first, second, and third place. And that happened for 4 weeks. So there's four acts. All together, it would make an episode of Star Trek. It's Captain Kirk meeting uh, Captain Picard, um, and it was a time travel thing.
That's so cool. So it's kind of similar to the movie Star Trek Generation.
Hmm.
We have Picard and Kirk meet. What was it? The trying to remember the name of the field. What was it? The not the vortex. Gosh, it will come back to me. It'll come back to me. But that's so cool. Seriously. And that was like what, week three of that contest where that was like that went to the top as far as ratings and all that.
Yeah, so I won the third week, and they gave I won money. I won a MacBook
Oh,
and a bunch of swag, a bunch of stuff. It was really cool. And then on the boards, it was kind of like with wordplay on the boards there. A lot of people, several people were participating a lot, and I was participating a lot with this one group of people, and we ended up becoming friends in real life. And uh, so I've met several of them in person. One of them moved to LA, and I hang out with him every once in a while. That was he won the overall contest. He won the fourth week, and then uh, they basically did a random a random drawing to see which of the four would be get the grand prize, which was meeting with um, a guy who was a consultant on Star Trek and wrote some episodes named Andre Bormanis.
wow. Man, that's so cool. Wow. Oh my gosh, that's cool because and it's cool though because I also had no idea that you wrote a spec script for Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So I take it so when Kirk versus Picard came along, it's kind of like, yeah, this is up my alley. I'll give it a, swing and see what happens if I hit a home run. But that's so cool that it was well received and he got, you won great prizes. That's so cool. And also that kind of trying to think of any other film projects so that you worked on. But also, since when you mentioned Secret Disciple, I'm very curious what the basic premise of that story is, just on the topic of screenplays currently. So would you be able to talk a little bit more about the story of Secret Disciple and just other screenplays that people may not know about that you've wrote, stuff like that?
Sure. Secret Disciple was is a story. It's kind of similar to now I can't think of the name of it. You know those Tom Hanks movies, the thrillers that have to do with the Catholic Church and
Oh, yes, like Da Vinci Code.
yeah, Da Vinci Code. It I wrote the script a few years before Da Vinci Code, but it's one of the reasons I think it never got made was because Da Vinci Code ended up getting made, and it would have been too similar. It would have looked like kind of a ripoff of it, even though I did it first. It's the same kind of idea. In the Bible, there's a um, it says that this guy named Joseph Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took Jesus's body out, put Jesus' body in the tomb. They were the ones that did it, and it mentioned that Joseph of Arimathea, that's how you pronounce it. Joseph of Arimathea was a secret disciple of Jesus. So basically, he's like a rich guy who was a disciple of Jesus, but not out. He it was hidden. So I thought it would be cool to write like a suspense thriller about like a document that gets found that reveals some other stuff that had happened, along with them putting the body. Like, why are those two guys the ones that put the body in the tomb? So I just extrapolated from that. So the movie is mostly about a graduate student in at a university uh, in California, and he's given this document that they found, and they don't trust. They're afraid to send it because there's this big conspiracy around it. So then they give it to this guy to drive across the country, and then people start chasing him, and it's a it's a thriller after that.
That's so cool. Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that parallel development is real. Like you could be working on something for years. It's like, yes, I'm gonna, and then it's like, oh, here comes another title that's kind of some
Hmm.
stuff. So, but yeah, but it sounds like a cool story. Man. But and then of course, what other scripts have you written? Because I know that Terry just coincidentally just released a new wordplay column called Shelf Puppies. And it's basically on the topic of scripts that haven't been made. And he uses the analogy of a little puppy that's still on the shelf that all it wants is just love and attention to be made and run around in the yard. And I never thought of it like that before. It's like, yeah, that's true. So, but because of the similarities with Da Vinci Code and of course its sequels, I think it's like what Angels and Demons and stuff like that. So, have you ever thought about retooling that script into a book, or is it just another shelf puppy, just kind of there? Have you ever thought about doing something like that? Like,
I did actually. I There was a while when I was trying to turn it into a novel, but I got working on other things and I never finished it. That that screenplay was optioned, but it just never got made. They didn't find a producer for it.
uh,
Um,
so it became like a calling card script, where so because
yeah.
I think I'm trying to look through the list on your website. Like how many contests? I think there's like more than 20 or something like that, which is amazing, seriously,
Mhm.
of the level of each contest had won. So even though it never got made, sadly, that's still awesome that it was a big contender with a lot of these screenwriting contests. So that's still something to be really proud about, honestly.
Yeah, I there was a one day I was about to leave for Colorado from to go to my dad's retirement party, and I got a call from someone at one of the production companies that had requested Secret Disciple after I was a nickel quarterfinalist. And this woman was on the other end, and she was like out of breath almost. And she said, "Yes, I'm calling about the script Secret Disciple." And I said, "Oh yeah, yeah. Uh, I wrote it." And she said, "Please tell me it's still available." And I said, "Yeah, it's still available. Why?" And she said, "Oh, well, I'm at this production company. I'm not going to name it, but and I'm the assistant to the president of the company, and I'm reading it right now, and it's so good that I can't put it down. I'm getting upset when I have to answer the phone or someone comes in or something like that because I hate, you know, being interrupted reading the script." And I was like, "Oh, wow, thanks." She said, "Yeah, our readers, it went through two readers and then it went to the development executive and they all loved it. And then they gave it to me to give to the president." And then she's going to read it this weekend. So I was all excited, of course. Um, and then weeks went by and I didn't hear anything. So I called and followed up, got a hold of some assistant. He said, "Oh no, there was a big upheaval here, and uh, most of the people that were here a few weeks ago are no longer working here." He had never heard of my script. He asked me for the info on it so he could look for it. Yeah, it was a complete gut punch.
Oh man, I'm sorry. And it And I think some people don't realize that when there's a change of management in production companies or studios, is that it doesn't mean that that project is viable. I mean, it's honestly by the grace of God if it moves on to the next like newer management, or it's like, hey, what's what, so I'm sorry that happened. It's kind of like the excitement of it, then it's like, oh, like, okay. So yeah, I'm
I,
sorry to hear about that. That's
it came back, the whole thing came back to haunt me, not haunt me, but um, a few years later, I was in a TV writing group with this guy, Brian, that I had met. And we used to take turns on who drove because we lived in West LA. It was in Encino, which is in the valley, San Fernando Valley. So it's quite a drive. Um, and so one day he was driving back and we had talked about a lot about the TV scripts we had written, but not features. And he said, have you written any features? And I said, um, yeah, I have a script called Secret Disciple. And he literally slammed on the brakes and he looked at me and said, "You're the Secret Disciple guy?" And I
oh
said, "What
man.
do you mean?" He said, "I was working at, the production company that I talked about earlier, as a reader, and they were all excited about it. That was all they talked about for like a week." And he said, two readers read it, and loved it, and it went up. The development executive loved it, and he said, I don't know why it didn't get made,
Wow.
but
So wow.
I had no idea that he had worked at that production company.
But that's so cool. I mean, what are the chances of that? Like someone you
Mhm.
just happen to talk to slamming the brakes. I mean, wow. Well, it's kind of like, okay, so even though it didn't get made, yeah, it's
Mhm.
good that there's that positive word of mouth. So that's awesome. Really awesome.
Thanks.
And then also, aside from writing, because I wanted to try to touch on this before we run out of time, you also did background acting. And I was able to go through three very top TV shows that you've done, and was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, how you got into background acting, because I've done background acting myself on a feature film called Secretariat, but just talk about the big three TV shows that you worked on, and how did you get into background acting, and talk about those three TV shows that you worked on.
Sure. Uh, my wife had been a background actor for a few years before I met her. And as I mentioned earlier, was obsessed with TV when I was young. I've always been obsessed with TV and movies. And I always wanted to be on TV. I didn't want to be an actor, but I wanted to be on TV. I don't know why. It was just one of the things on my bucket list, I guess. So I asked her what you have to do, and she said, "You just go down to Central Casting, and they take a picture of you, and you sign up, and they call you." And I was like, "Okay." So at the time, the school I worked at, I was teaching at, had a year-round schedule where I worked for a couple months, then I had a month off, then I worked for a couple months, had a month off. So I had a month off here and there where I was able to do these, gigs working on shows in the background. And there was a few that if I said the name, you'd probably never heard of them, but there were three shows I worked on that were really cool. One was Gilmore Girls, which uh, I wasn't a huge fan of Gilmore Girls. I knew it was very well written and everything, but so many other people that I know are, like, including my daughter now. Um, and I had a, I didn't have any lines, but I had couple of scenes in that where I'm right there in the camera and stuff. So that was one of the most fun background jobs I had. And then uh, I was on X-Files, which at the time was my favorite TV show. So I was ecstatic that I got the job. And it's like the fifth to last episode they ever made or something back in the original run. So if I hadn't done that, I probably never would have been on there. And they were filming in a police station, a, a set that looked like a police station, but all the other sets were around us at Fox Studios. So I was just like walking around in Scully's apartment, and I was just like, wow, this is so surreal to me, you know? And then the other one was Deadwood, the HBO show. That was really fun too, but it was also miserable in some ways because it was supposed to be in Deadwood, you know, South Dakota in the winter time. So we're wearing kind of winter clothes to keep warm, and they're spraying down the dirt streets at Melody Ranch where they film a lot of westerns, and making it all muddy. And we're wearing authentic clothing, so it's kind of itchy. It's all like wool and stuff, and it's real itchy. And then on top of that, we're supposed to be miners, so they were like, put out your hands, and you put out your hands, and they squirted this black stuff on them, and they just told you just wipe it all over your face. So there was some of that was a little miserable, but it was so cool to see those people acting in person, like Timothy Oliphant and uh, my favorite movie is Blade Runner, and I got to be in a scene with what's his name? He was on Deadwood. He used to be on Newhart also, the Larry Darrell and Darrell guys. Uh, William Sanderson.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He played the guy that made all the toys in
Oh,
Blade Runner that walk. Yeah.
right.
So that was pretty really, really cool being able to work with him. And then there was just so many good actors on that. It was
Yeah, but that's
amazing.
that's so cool. I mean, you've X-Files, that's my number one show. Also, I have watched Gilmore Girls.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with the other shows too and Deadwood. But that's so cool on X-Files being able to say, yeah, I was in Scully's apartment. I was or and also being a cowboy. Because I can imagine so with the like you just mentioned earlier, since it wasn't going to shoot up in Deadwood, Dakota in the winter season.
Mhm.
So that meant when you were wearing all the historically accurate cowboy garb, you were hot, I can imagine, just with the heat and all that.
It was 120 degrees some days.
Oh man.
Um, yeah, that part was kind of a nightmare. But I worked on that show for like 3.5 weeks. I was a regular extra, you know, that just came back every day and worked.
Really?
The other jobs, it was just a 1 day thing, but that was a regular, almost the whole month I was off from school. And then I could have kept going too, but um, I had to go back to teaching.
Man, but that's so cool. So 3 weeks for Deadwood.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Man, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Wow. Yeah, and I think what man, I'm just letting that absorb in my mind. Like X-Files, Gilmore Girls, and Deadwood. It's different genres, but that's so cool that you got to kind of visit in that sandbox and got to see, like how you just said right now, got to see other actors, how they worked. Because I think when I was surprised when I did a background extra for myself. It was kind of like, did you have to do, was there a lot of waiting? Like or was it like, did you just like immediately just jumped in and it was like, okay, we're gonna do this scene? Or is it like, okay, it's an hour so far, they haven't called me. Oh, now we're being called. So was anything like that in between those shows?
Oh yeah, there was lots and lots of just sitting around waiting. In fact, on X-Files, I was in a scene uh, when Robert Patrick came in. He was on the show at the time, playing an FBI agent, and he was the main focus of the scene. But his wife, estranged wife, was in the scene too. She was sitting next to me on the bench, and we kept waiting. We were waiting, waiting. So I just she started talking to me, and we just started talking between it, like scenes, just waiting and stuff. And then I found out later that his real wife played her. Like I was sitting
Really?
there talking with his real wife. Yeah.
Wow. So Robert Patrick, who played, I think his name was John Doggett, and of course he's the
hmm
Terminator. He's the T2 and Terminator.
hmm
So wow. So
Yeah. That's another one of my favorite movies.
yeah, because
Um,
Yeah.
And one day on Deadwood, I went to eat lunch. I got my lunch. I walked in. There was a huge tent where all the people ate, and I sat down. It was like the kind of table you have in a cafeteria at school, the big long ones with the bench things. And so I just wanted to be off by myself. So I sit down way in the corner all by myself. And all of a sudden, some people come over and they sit down right across from me. And it's two of the producers, and they're there with Ernest Borgnine because he had come and toured the set.
Whoa, Ernest
It-
Borgnine, really?
yeah. And he was in, Ernest Borgnine was amazing. He was in so many things. But one of my other favorite movies is Escape from New York, where he plays Cabby. So
Yeah.
I was just like, and
Cabby.
he sat down right across from me, and I was like included in the conversation and stuff, and it was just those kind of, I still get starstruck. Those kind of things, no matter how long I live in LA, and no matter how many famous people I meet, I still get,
Goosebumps. Just get those
yeah,
goosebumps.
yeah,
Yeah. But that's so cool. Ernest Borgnine, my gosh. I mean, for those you don't, for viewers who don't know about Ernest Borgnine, well, I know the younger generation, he played Mermaid Man and SpongeBob SquarePants. He was like, hero.
yeah,
But also he was Mikhail in Mikhail's Navy, and he like he's and also Cabby and John Carpenter's Escape from New York, which John Carpenter, he grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where I
Mm.
but Ernest Borgnine, man, wow, that's so cool. That's awesome.
So yeah, those were great experiences.
Yeah. And then also, I'm just looking at the time right now. So
Mhm.
before we conclude our interview, I really appreciate you again coming on my
Mhm.
show to be one of my guests, both as a novelist, screenwriter, actor, and fellow word player. So that kind of brings us to the topic of your top five wordplay columns that really kind of gave you, I would say, probably were influential in the way you kind of approached your writing in terms of how you looked at scenes or story structure or concepts or characters. So let's go through your list of your top five wordplay columns. So what's your number one for your favorite column written by Terrazio for his wordplayer.com website?
My favorite one is Mental Real Estate, where he talked. I think he wrote it in around 2000, and it was basically talking about what they now call IP, intellectual property, but he didn't use that term because I don't think anybody was using it back then that I know of.
No, they weren't. No.
Yeah, but that was basically what he was saying, was giving advice on, you know, uh, finding somebody famous to write about, or get finding something in the public domain, but basically anything that already is out there in the world in some way, um, whether you option a book or comic book, or um, do a remake or whatever, that it has a better chance of getting made because producers aren't taking as much of a chance when they put money into it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think for some people who are not part of, who are just, regular people who don't understand Hollywood, how it works. I know sometimes I'll hear the expression, I'm sure you've heard this too, where it's like, oh, Hollywood's out of original ideas, and that's why. But it's like, no, it's kind of like a business. It is a bit show, it's show business where you're asking for someone to spend certain amount of money to see a movie or read a book or a screenplay. So it's like it's kind of like placing safe bets. They're going to go for the ones that are sure going to draw an audience versus which is versus take an unknown. Now, thankfully, independent world, they do a lot of great work with unknown material, but sometimes, unknown material will still be produced in mainstream. So I don't think it's so much as Hollywood is out of ideas. It's just like if we're going to make an investment, we want to invest in something that already has a built-in audience. Do you think that's true in that regards with and just using mental real estate as a reference to that?
Yeah, I think it's totally why there's so many Marvel movies and so many Star Wars movies and so many remakes. And yeah, it's not because there aren't great scripts and great ideas out there that aren't. those. It's just they're hedging their bets.
Yeah, and also that can bring the conversation of love, like, let me tell you about what development hell is. Just
Yeah.
react. But now what's your second? Now what's your second wordplay column that you enjoyed that was written by either Terry or Ted Elliott?
Point of view. Um, it talked about the different points of view, and the thing that really fascinated me about that article was I had read at least a couple dozen books about screenwriting at that point, and I didn't remember ever reading about this, about how important it is to stick with one point of view or maybe two if it's a romantic comedy or and I had never thought of it that way. Uh, and that changed my way of thinking about writing because when I look at stories or scripts that I wrote before that, sometimes I would jump around more between characters and stuff. But after reading that, I realized um, it's better to stick with the fewest number of characters point of view you can have, the better the script's probably going to be.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
I, and I use it in novel writing too.
Exactly, yeah. And we know a lot of great films, like Back to the Future is like, especially if you look at the first film, that's all told from Marty McFly's point of view. And if you do have scenes where there's other characters, he's either somewhat present in a scene or he's about to enter a scene. So yeah, because I think Back to the Future is also in your top 20 favorite films of all time as well, I think.
Top 10, yeah.
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 And I completely like that article as well. And that because it's interesting because like you said just perfectly, I don't think any other screenwriting book has covered that. So it was amazing just to kind of share your same sentiments about like, yeah, like it is important to know what the point of view of your story is because if you keep now if you're doing an ensemble like piece, that's that's different where you have different characters you're following, kind of like American Graffiti. You follow more than one character because you're following a group of friends on their last night, but after graduating high school and they don't know what they're going to do, but you're still following them like so yeah, so I think it's kind of important for just anyone starting out writing to really consider what kind of point of view they're telling. So I definitely one of my favorite columns too. Definitely one of my favorite as well.
And next is fudging.
Yes.
uh, before I read that, I have to say I was so slavish to proper formatting and making sure that everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. But after reading that, not only he and Ted, but plenty of other people kind of fudge the margins or the font size or do these tricks to shorten the number of pages they have. Because the shorter it is, the more likely it is to get read, for one thing. Um, and the cheaper it would be to make, theoretically, because it would be less minutes. Um, so after that, I wasn't so worried about it. And I've even been known to, if there's a contest that has a limit on the number of pages, I would sometimes just move it just a little bit if I'm like only a page or two too long. And I feel like I've cut everything I could.
Yeah, and it's just simply like minimizing the margins or the space in between like a paragraph or
Mhm.
this slug and stuff like that. Or if it's like, hey, do I really need this particular word that's kind of dangling down the paragraph? Can I shorten it? Yeah, that's a great one too. Really great column. And I'm trying to think of another example with that same column. I think it is I think Terry in this column used an example. He read the Raiders of the Lost Ark screenplay and he kind of did a comparison and he did something cool where he kind of fudged the page count, typed it, and it was almost exactly or something like that, if I
Yeah,
remember.
that's in the fudging article, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, the
he talks
fudging
about,
article. Yeah.
yeah.
And then what's your fourth one? What's your fourth favorite wordplay column?
My fourth and fifth are kind of go together. It's the first two, A Foot in the Door and Strange Attractor. Um, I feel like if he had written them later, he probably would have just had it be one column because these are both really short compared to his other ones.
Mhm.
Um, but just the idea of your concept and try to find something unique um, that will attract somebody's attention. Um, yeah, just the idea of having a good concept, because he says at the beginning that's the main thing he sees lacking in scripts that reads is good concept. So and also he talks about um, you know being able to express what your screenplay is about in one or two lines, which is basically a log line. So after that, I started really working on log lines. Um, and I've gotten pretty good at coming up with good log lines that are really short. I have a couple of writer friends that will come to me and they'll give me their log line and say, "Can you make this shorter?" And I always find ways to shorten it up, but still have it convey the same information.
That's true. Yeah, because I think, and sometimes, I think the one other good example, but though, because I do agree, because they're both good columns, the first two that Terry wrote, but they definitely should be one column. I definitely agree, Mint. And also that kind of goes back to mental real estate of kind of like what's your story about, or what's the setting, or what, and there's more factors to that. But also I kind of take it to like say like sometimes we have this experience where say if like say hey I'm going to go see a movie, oh what's it about, and then you just talk, and it's kind of like you're just talking to a regular person. So that's one way to kind of do as an example of a log line. It can be something as simple as, oh it's so cool, out of work guys start up a ghost exterminating business up in New York City, they're called Ghostbusters, and very simply. Or one other movie most people don't know about is Ghost in the Darkness, starring Kilmer, written by William Goldman. And it's like, oh, it's Lawrence Arabia meets Jaws, where they're building a railroad in Africa based on a true story. And it's about these killer lions that are disrupting the process of getting this railroad. But yeah, so you can see within a few sentences. So I think when people can't really distill it down, it's kind of like they forget, like just imagine like you're telling someone very quickly without boring them with all the details. But sometimes I think, and I don't know if this is true or not, sometimes if a project demands a little bit more than just two sentences, then that's more of a synopsis, really.
Yeah, you got your log line, your synopsis, your one page, your treatment. Yeah, there's a lot of, and now they've got the pitch deck.
Yeah, and that's something I'm kind of learning about pitch deck because I've never used. So can you explain more a little about the pitch deck, just a little bit about that?
Pitch decks are kind of like a way of showing someone that you're trying to get to buy the movie or give some money or whatever. Um, you want to get someone involved rather than just hand them a treatment or synopsis or the script itself. A pitch deck is kind of like it's almost like a usually it's kind of like a PowerPoint presentation, but uh, it's not boring like a PowerPoint, like most PowerPoint presentations. You try to have good artwork on there, um, and you talk about the main focus of the movie, the theme, uh, and then you go through the characters and like you can. Some people will just pick real actors and put their picture there and go like, "This is who I'm thinking of," or, when I wrote it or whatever. But you can just find pictures anywhere that kind of represent. And if you know somebody, or if you're yourself are good at like Photoshop and stuff, then so you can sometimes create some really good stuff. That one of my uh, friends that I have co-written a few screenplays with, he's a graphic artist, so we made a couple of pitch decks, and they were by the time he was done with them, they were just amazing.
That's so cool. And just using like references from like other films or just original concept art in this case.
Hmm. Yeah.
Man, that's so cool. Yeah, I appreciate you explaining that more because I think that was and that's kind of helpful too, just using something visual just to get help sell the idea. So that is really cool that you did that too with some of your scripts that you co-wrote.
It's kind of like Terry used to talk about having a cork board. Like the article about pitching is also one of my favorites. He talked about carrying around a cork board and having, different artwork. And actually Mikey Zell and I actually had an animation idea once that we went to Terry's house and pitched to him with a cork board. But I think it's kind of the newer version of that. You don't have to carry around the board anymore. You can just show somebody the pitch deck and they get a better idea of what you're going for.
Yeah, because I think that's what the Duffer Brothers did for Stranger Things. Because I remember
Hmm.
uh, like they took some images from John Carpenter's Halloween, and then they also used that scene from E.T. the Extraterrestrial where Elliot, it's nighttime, it's after the spaceship has flown away, leaving E.T. on Earth. And it's just like a simple like wide shot showing the backyard. It's kind of a little bit of fog, moonlight's filtering in, and you have basically like this medium wide shot of Elliot outside his yard holding a baseball. And of course, ET is hidden in the shed. When I came across it, it's like, yeah, that does kind of so even though I've already watched the show, it was cool to see how they use little things like that just to kind of present what the mood is and all that. So but so yeah, so that's I think that's cool when people can do that. So that's cool that you did that too for your projects that you pitched and all that. So that's really cool.
Thanks.
And
Yeah.
then what's your fifth wordplay column that you like?
Um, I think that the one I was just mentioning, I actually can't remember the name of it right now. The one is pitching. What's it called?
Oh,
Uh,
wind up and pitch, is that's what
Wind
it
up, something like that. Yeah, yeah. Because I have had to pitch, and again, I didn't know what to do. If I hadn't, if I hadn't read that column and actually pitched to Terry, and he gave us a lot of advice after we pitched to him on what to change and what to do better. If it wasn't for that, I would have no idea what to do in a pitch meeting.
Yeah, same here, same here. Yeah, because I think if you don't have, I just call them the tools to do a pitch. So yeah, so that's one of the things I'm very grateful for Terry Razio's website is just having that resource for writers for, all of his columns are fantastic. But the ones that you mentioned, those are my favorites as well. Yeah, so I think it's awesome just to be able to have that out there for writers, especially, if they're, it's kind of like they know what they want to do, but just don't know how to do it. And then if you have someone not so much doing the work for them, but saying, hey, here's some tools that you can use, see if what works, what doesn't, and if it doesn't, just throw it away and do your own thing. So yeah, I'm definitely grateful for Terry Razio's website, just like you are. Because there's been times where if I was struggling with something, it's like, oh yeah, just go back, reread this column and try to do that. So that's awesome. That's worked well for your favor too. So I think that's so cool.
Yep, those are the
And
good ones.
yeah, and unfortunately, I think I noticed we're at the end of our time. But before we end this interview, can you talk about just your upcoming projects you're working on? I know you mentioned the more books within the Raptor series, and also I think in the background I noticed some. Are those like cover art posters of your books? I think in the background behind you.
Yeah, uh, the six or the three Raptors, three Harrier, and then the other co-writer I was talking about, Artie Cabrera. I wrote some books called Gravity City, um, sci-fi books with him. So whenever I have a new book come out, I go to like Printful or one of those, and I do an 11 by 17 or 12 by 18, I don't remember, version of the cover, and then frame it and put it up.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. That's so cool. And but yeah, so I can't wait for your new work to come out. And again, thank you so much for just taking the time out of your schedule just to talk about your projects that you're working on, and also again, wordplayer.com and your favorite columns and your acting. That's so cool. Ernest Borgnine, that is at Scully's apartment. That's awesome.
Thank you. It was fun. I
Yeah,
enjoyed myself.
awesome. Again, so then thank you so much. I appreciate you
Mhm.
coming on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching my conversation with special guest Christopher Valin. If you have enjoyed this episode of Reed's Conversations, be sure to click the like button and subscribe button on my YouTube channel. That way, you will be notified for future upcoming episodes. Also, be sure to visit Christopher Valin's website at www.christophervalin.com, as well as Terry Rosio's website, www.wordplayer.com.